Welcome to A Life Worth Living from the treatment program for self-harm with Sydney Clinical Psychology. This week's summary is going to be looking at mindfulness skills. While these skills are taught over several weeks in the program, we'll be providing just one summary which you'll be able to use on a number of occasions. Okay, so today we're going to be expanding on the mindfulness skills. Last week we talked about wise mind, which is a kind of general introduction to mindfulness. Today we're going to look at the DBT mindfulness skills, which are separated into two sets of skills. These are called the what skills and the how skills, and we'll look at each of these individually. The use of mindfulness has grown enormously in recent years. And it covers many, many different things. It's used in many psychological therapies. And as I mentioned, it also refers to many, many different things. However, there are some common things about mindfulness and the way it's used. And there are some specific things about mindfulness and the way it's talked about in DBT. So one of those is about staying in the moment. And that will become apparent what that means later. But essentially it just is about keeping yourself with what's currently going on and what you know to be true, rather than maybe spending a lot of time reflecting about the past or making judgments about things or thinking about the future. Mindfulness also includes increasing your awareness. Mindfulness is about paying attention on purpose, and what that means is that you can become much better at understanding all of the things that go on inside your head and the things that influence you. Mindfulness also involves being less hooked in by things. What we mean by that is by being less drawn in by thoughts and feelings that are potentially problematic. Mindfulness involves acceptance, and that is acceptance of thoughts and feelings, but only doing that if it means that it's going to move your life forward in a positive way. And then finally, mindfulness can be seen as a form of relaxation, in that it's helpful to let go, and in doing so it can reduce your stress. Mindfulness has also been shown to help you sleep better, and has been shown to help with other things like pain and physical illness. Okay, so let's look at the first lot of mindfulness skills in DBT, and these are called the what skills. In other words, what is mindfulness? The first of the what skills is observe. We talked about this in the group and did some exercises to help you see what's meant by observe. Observe is about bringing your attention to something. It doesn't necessarily involve words, but it does involve some kind of effort. So you might find your attention is drawn to something like a thought or a person or a car driving past, or you might take your mind to something that you choose. This is what we're talking about, is either noticing where your mind is going or making choices about where to take your mind. Observe then involves holding your mind somewhere, for whatever brief period of time. Now, this should be not that unfamiliar to you. This is something that you're doing all the time. When you scan around a bus, a room and so on, your attention stops at things. Initially, what you stop at is something that you might very quickly judge to be something that you like or dislike. From there, you may then choose, and I'll use that in inverted commas, to continue to observe that thing, or you may move on. So DBT observe skills are really about bringing conscious awareness to this process of what you're observing or what you're noticing. The next of the what skills is describe. And again, we did an exercise in group demonstrating the describe skill. Describe involves labelling the thing that you're observing. So you might label something as a chair or a table, or you might label it as good or bad, or something that you like or dislike. However, in the early part of learning mindfulness, we want to encourage you to just label things using your 5 senses. So what you can see, hear, smell, taste and touch. So to use the example of a table, if you're observing a table, you might label it square or black or low. Or you might label it shiny or dull. These are all physical properties of the table and things that you can say potentially are facts about it. Similarly, if you were to label some thoughts, you might try to label the physical properties of those thoughts as if it were a table. So you might label the thoughts as fast or slow or heavy or soft or hazy or sharp or so on. Now this might feel awkward first of all, particularly when labelling thoughts and feelings, but persist with it and it will get easier. And if you work on this, labelling thoughts and feelings in this way, it'll allow you to develop much more control or influence over what happens in your mind. The third of the what skills is participate. Participate involves being involved in what's happening. So it is actively and knowingly participating or being engaged on purpose, acting on purpose if you like. So this may involve participating in something in life, or it might involve participating in your thoughts, your emotions, or your inner world. Now first of all, when you work on participate, we want you to practice on things simple that are simple. So try just using it with eating, cooking or walking. Bring your attention to the activity and persist with it while you're observing what you were doing. Try to be mindfully aware that you are participating in a particular activity. And finally, try to keep it up even when you feel the urge to do something else. Now we're going to look at the second aspects of the DBT mindfulness skills. These are called the how skills. And there are three of these skills: non-judgmentally, one mindfully, and effectively. We're going to talk about these in the group in much more detail, but I'm just going to go through them briefly now. So the first of these is non-judgmentally. Non-judgmentally sounds pretty straightforward. However, it's actually very, very difficult to do. Our minds are always judging. They're actually judging, reasoning machines, and so they do it naturally, without any effort on our part. Therefore, I think to be non-judgmental actually probably means to work on being less judgmental, or work on being less judgmental in situations where making judgments is unhelpful. After all, at times it may be very helpful to make judgments. In order to do this, we've got to use the what skills first. In other words, you have to observe and describe to yourself or label to yourself what's actually happening. So, for example, you might observe and label judgments. Part of the use of the importance of non-judgmental is it allows us to notice the judgments we make and see them as judgments rather than the truth of a situation. So to give you an example of that, someone might tell themselves that they're useless or they're a failure, and that might seem like it's the truth. However, this is actually a judgment and it's not a fact, not in the same way that something is black or something is sharp or square. It may be a very strong judgment and it may seem very true, but it's really important to learn that this is an opinion that you have about yourself and that it's possible that there's more to you than these kind of judgments. This may be hard at first, like all mindfulness skills, but just stick at it and it will get easier. The next of the skills is one mindfully. One mindfully could also be called do one thing at a time. For this reason it fits very well with the participate skill, since when we participate we're going to be doing things one mindfully. This is the idea that if you're eating, just focus on eating. If you're talking, focus on talking, and similarly if you're listening. Again, this may seem quite easy, but in practice our minds are constantly jumping around to different things, and so it takes a lot of work and effort to develop this skill. One mindfully also means letting go of distractions and focusing. So you can practice being one mindful when you eat, swim, listen, write, talk and so on. The final of the DBT skills is effectively. This is perhaps the most important skill of the whole program. What this means is do what works. I'm going to say that one more time. Do what works. We spend lots of our time trying to do the right thing or trying to work out what the right thing is. We also spend lots of our time trying to work out what the truth of the situation is. What am I really like? What's my real self? What do people really think of me? Doing what works involves shifting your focus away from this and moving it to not looking at what's real or unreal, but just what works for you or what's effective. So it's quite possible that it's not effective or not helpful to ask yourself those kind of questions. Doing what works means letting go of old habits and trying new things, and only keeping going with things if they move you in the life direction that you'd like to take. This is a really important principle because people often continue to do the same thing over and over again, even if it doesn't make any difference to their life, or perhaps if it's even detrimental. So once again, I would say that of all of the DBT skills, do what works is probably the central and most important thing to focus on.